Stan Hieronymus joins me this week to discuss hops, thiols, and the World Brewing Congress. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 310. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 310, and it's early September 2024. Stan Hieronymus joins me this week to discuss hops, thiols, and the World Brewing Congress. Thank you to this week's sponsors, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They've recently launched an all-new experience called Craft Spirits and Distilling. If you make or love spirits, check out spiritsanddistilling.com for recipes, how-to videos, their Spirits and Distilling podcast, and much more. Again, that new site is spiritsanddistilling.com. And BeerSmith Web, the online version of BeerSmith brewing software. BeerSmith for the web lets you design great beer recipes from any browser, including your tablet or phone. Edit recipes on the go with access to the same full suite of recipe building tools as our desktop version. Try BeerSmith Web today by creating a free account at beersmithrecipes.com. And finally, a reminder to click that like and subscribe button on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or whatever platform you're on. Clicking those buttons is a great way to support the show. And now let's jump into this week's episode. Today on the show, I welcome back Stan Hieronymus. Stan is the author of For the Love of Hops and has authored a number of books on brewing as well, including Brewing Local, Brew Like a Monk, and Brewing with Wheat. Stan has also penned hundreds of periodicals and is a certified beer judge. Stan, it's always a pleasure to have you back on the show. How are you?
I'm doing fine, and I'm always thrilled when you remember me.
I'm glad to have you here. I guess you've been traveling a lot from what I understand, right? You're always traveling, it seems.
Yeah. Of most interest, I think, to the listeners today is the recent World Brewing Congress in Minneapolis, which is a gathering, happens every other year. Members of the Master Brewers Association of the Americas and the American Society for Brewing Chemists. So there's a lot of looking forward to the future of beer, and particularly from the more technical side. Yeah,
I was going to say MBAA, obviously a very technical organization.
American Society for Brewing Chemists is more.
Yeah, I should. I'm sorry, I skipped their ASBC as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I understand you attended a number of sessions on thiols, and thiols apparently are still a huge topic. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to Stacey Williams at New Belgium Brewery Brewing, and she's on the committee that looks at proposals and decides what's going to be presented. And this was several months ago. Mm-hmm. And she said, "Oh, yeah, we've got a lot of thiol stuff," which surprised me a bit, just because we're like 7 years into looking at thiols more intensely, and you realize there's still a lot more research to be done, a lot more understanding about it, and so on. So, among other things, I went to one, and certainly this merits looking into more deeply, and that is the role free amino nitrogen fan plays in freeing thiols during the fermentation process. But it's tricky because you're going to have to balance it. The lower the fan, the more thiol development you're going to get, at least of 4-MMP and the 3-MH. But, of course, when you lower your fan, you're going to get some other aromas that you may not like. So I think that's worth pursuing that. I probably will write about it within the next several months for Brewing Industry Guide. More use to homebrewers probably is Hopsteiner has gone in and measured the thiols in 99 varieties.
Wow.
And then they've classified those as, high thiol impact, medium impact, and no impact at all. So you can look and say and realize, hey, Callista, I might be able to get something out of Callista. We know Mosaic and Citra, obviously, things like that. So that's a really useful list.
Interesting. And I think, at one time when we were looking at thiols, we're primarily in a lot of the American hops. Have they found any, a lot of thiol levels in other hops or no?
Not well. It's tricky. What do you call an American hop?
Yeah. Well, I meant hops
So
that from hops from American, I guess,
right.
heritage.
So when you have some American heritage in them, not necessarily. It's more a lot of attention is paid to Neo Mexicanus because it sounds cool.
Yeah.
And it's in Zappa, for instance, from CLS Farms, and Zappa's a great name. And it's certainly a factor in what makes Sabro unique.
Mm-hmm.
But really, there are three. So when you look at Humulus lupulus, we tend to talk in terms of, on the European side, Humulus lupulus, and it's really Humulus lupulus lupulus, and on the U.S. side, Humulus lupulus neomexicanus hasn't really been a factor in much breeding until recently. The important hop is Humulus lupulus lupuloidus. So when you look back and see varieties that have that lupuloidus factor, so this would be like Callista and Mandarina Bavaria out of Germany. But then you get the heritage, the important heritage. What makes New Zealand hops unique is the male component, which has as the background is cluster, which cluster, of course, is lupuloidus. So that's a factor in the New Zealand hop. Certainly, the New Zealand terroir is a factor in that as well. But so you can get a crossover. For instance, you can look at Nelson Sauvin has a thiol that's not found as commonly, which is 3MS4MP,
Okay.
or 3M4MP, depending upon how. That's the same compound. It's just two different definitions. So that compound is in Nelson Sauvin. It's in Hallertau Blanc out of Germany. Hallertau Blanc is a daughter of Cascade.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in a variety in development. The Hop Quality Group, which is about 50 American breweries, in 2015, they began sponsoring their own breeding program. And within a year, the first release from that program will come out. And there's a decent chance that'll be a hop right now that's just called Hop Quality Group 4. Its nickname is Middle Finger because on a chart that shows various compounds, the thiols really jump out, and that's because that hop also has the 3M4SMP. So you can get them, we're talking about 3 different continents. All you end up with that thiol. Wow. But its background goes back to lupuloidus.
Interesting. You were mentioning the thiol list that somebody they published a list. Is that available online anywhere or not?
As a matter of fact, I put it in my newsletter last week.
Oh,
my
cool.
newsletter is archived at hopqueries.com.
Hopqueries.com.
Right now it's on the front page. So there's the last newsletter is there. So
I'll definitely put a link in the show notes for it. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Sure.
So what else is going on in thiols? I know you attended a number of sessions. Did you find anything else new or interesting?
Well, the fan stuff is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
There are questions about yeast. So you have most of the yeast we use are not great. Thiols are in 2 forms: free, which makes it really easy. They're there, and they will pass on to beer if you don't boil your wort. But there are a lot more bound thiols. So it's looking at some yeast and heritage yeasts that might be better at freeing those thiols. So there's a fair amount of research on that. Efforts to breed yeast that will do this, and then of course the genetically modified yeast, which are really good at freeing these thiols, particularly the 3MH, which gives you a lot more like a guava and mango.
And I mean, that's the goal of all this thiol research, right? Is to get a lot of these fruity, mango, tropical flavors into the beer.
Right, and beers that people want it, and think when you're looking at a list of hops, which tend to have a lot of thiols, or not a lot of thiols, and you're thinking I'm going to go to get a new hop from Germany, might want to make sure that it's more like the landrace varieties like Mittelfrüh, Spalt, that don't have any thiols, because you really don't. Well, some people do. But generally, if you're going to enter a traditional Pilsner in a homebrew competition, mango is probably not going to be appropriate.
Probably not what you're looking for. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you got free thiols, you got bound thiols. Is there any way to help increase one or the other? Obviously, you're using these in the whirlpool and you're using these in dry hopping primarily, right?
Yeah,
because you already mentioned boiling's bad.
Yeah. If you look back, going back to the cluster hop.
Sure.
And so cluster has free 4-MMP. That means the yeast, you don't need the yeast to do something special.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to use a lot of cluster late and in dry hopping. But at the time people were using cluster, they didn't brew beers like that. You didn't dry hop with cluster. It was generally used at the beginning of the boil.
Yeah.
That eliminates the thiols are highly volatile, so they have a high impact. I think I've mentioned this before in the show. Basically, you perceive them in parts per trillion.
Mm-hmm. I know the amounts are just really, really small.
Yeah, so it's you think of that as a pinhead in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's the level of perception. Getting that level of perception into beer is not that easy, because you start out small and the brewing process tends to eliminate it. That's why you want to use them in the whirlpool or in dry hopping.
Well, a moment ago you mentioned thiol enhancing yeast, and we also have thiol boosters as well. Obviously a lot of the big thiol hops are in demand and new hops are constantly emerging, but what are your opinions on enhancing with these yeasts and thiol boosters to try and get more free thiols into the finished beer?
Well, an important thing to realize is also malt has bound thiols.
Okay.
So when you use these yeast, you're going to free more thiols. You need to take that into account, and I think that's harder because we don't really right now understand what's there.
I was going to say, has there been a lot of research into it? I'm not familiar with which kinds of malt might provide free thiols.
Well, there hasn't. That I think that's the next step, and there is a little bit of that. And as a matter of fact, I think there was a presentation WBC, but it conflicted with another one I was going to, so I wasn't able to sit in on that. When the proceedings become available to attendees, and I'll go ahead and read that and have a better sense. But it does add something of a wild card that if you're an anal brewer and like to control everything right now, that's an input you're not sure about. And it is easy to overdo.
Do we have any basic knowledge? Like, is it a particular style malt, pale malt?
Oh, no, not that. I haven't seen anything about that.
No idea what malts contain them, huh?
Yeah, but it's obvious that what people are using. It's going to be a pale Pilsner malt. Because you're seeing it in the new West Coast, very pale West Coast IPAs. You can get those with a lot of mango. Freestyle. Well, actually, it wasn't Freestyle that did it's Freestyle Hops did research related to. I take that back. It's Garage Project in New Zealand. They're the ones who actually are behind Phantasm. You're familiar with Phantasm?
Yeah, Phantasm, obviously, I think it's derived from
Phantasm,
grapes, right? Isn't it? Grape
Sauvignon
skins.
Blanc grape skins. And it's actually a separate company. So Josh Ruffle is the one, and he's also Garage Project. It gets complicated because Freestyle will use Phantasm and blend it with some of their hops. But when they were taking a look at Phantasm and putting it together with genetically modified yeast, which they're doing for a market beyond New Zealand because you can't use genetically modified yeast in New Zealand, they reached a point where they were going too far.
Yeah.
Where they say, "Oh, this is not a good flavor," and that was basic. I'm not sure if they were getting anything out of the malt or not. So you could go too far with Phantasm.
I've had homebrewers tell me the same thing, that if you try and apply everything, throw everything in the kitchen sink at getting as many thiols as possible into the beer, that it can create problems. What kind of off flavors do you get when you overdo it?
Well, I don't know how you describe too much guava and too much mango. It moves. Certainly, you can get rotten eggs. I think that's a thing. You're and part of the goal of some brewers is to get this bit of a rotten fruit character, but not too far, and then you just go over and you just get pure rotten.
So instead of mangoes, you get rotten mangoes, huh?
Or something even worse.
Well, how can a home brewer apply some of this knowledge of thiols to make better IPAs? Because it's hard for, I would say, the average home brewer to dive into perhaps the level you have.
Well, I think the tricky thing is
into the chemistry and everything.
Measuring it is super hard. You just got to realize. I think you have to accept some variables and be willing to experiment. That's the best way. So looking at this, as you look at it, we know some are more. That Citra and Mosaic would be examples. The ones you got, some you may not have paid attention to. Equinaut, certainly, which is another one that it has a pretty high level of 3,4 MSMP. So looking for things that are unique and then experimenting with them. There's a really nice paper which wouldn't seem related, and it had to do with using a engineered yeast at a benchtop level. Mm-hmm. So thinking about what you can do at a benchtop size as home brewing. So take your home brewing, so obviously a 5-gallon homebrew kit is smaller than benchtop for a large brewery. But, what you can do, say, at a gallon at a time and experiment with, primarily in that case, I would say dry hopping and putting different combinations together and seeing what works. And taking good notes. And then when you get something that works, know this works. Do not think that you found the final solution. That we don't always know exactly what's going on. Early on, this is like 10 years ago, when people were just starting to talk about thiols, and I saw a few YouTube posts with brewers who said they had it figured out. And they didn't really know what was going on, but it worked. The important thing is to find something that works and say, this works. Maybe I don't totally know why.
Interesting. Do you have a short list of hops to try? Maybe the thiol, top 5 or 6 or so.
Nelson Sauvin, obviously.
Yeah.
Because it does have unique character. Citra and Mosaic are there. Because we know exactly what they do. How many Citra Mosaic IPAs have you had?
Quite a few, actually.
Equinaut is a really nice spice that can bring unique character to it. Galaxy is another. and I haven't seen them measured. Which another thing about these, and it was not part of the list of 99 that Hopsteiner has, is Nectaron. It brings some unique qualities, that's for sure. That's keeping the list super short.
That's a good list.
Uh,
Well, that kind of brings us to the next topic. As the hop market evolves, we've got a variety of new hop products that are entering the market. Can you tell us a little about some of the new hop products that are coming out and how they compare to existing products? And I'm thinking of things like cryo hops or lupulin powder and so on.
Yeah. Well, I think both, not so much lupulin powder because it's harder to deal with. It's a nice thing cryo hops were developed for commercial breweries, obviously.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, cryo at the outset was just a powder, wasn't even in hop form. But that quickly evolved, and the pellets have made their way into the home market, so you can get those.
Yeah, and I think isn't cryo hops a form of lupulin powder or a variation of it? I thought.
Well, it's a pelletized lupulin.
That's
powder.
What I thought. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very similar to what's been around forever, which are T45s. In theory, a T90, which is basic pellet you get, is 90% of the material you get in the cone.
Mm-hmm.
It's really more like 92 or 93 anymore. And then a T45 would be 45%. And this was developed in part because it's cheaper to ship. You have the weight. When you're shipping the hops, you're paying less for the freight.
Well, and you're not carrying all the vegetal material along, right?
Right. Now, that question begins, how much of the vegetal material do you want? And that's sort of an ongoing question. So the plus to, and we could talk about the other products, which are basically flowable that you could use in the boil, clear into the whirlpool. Products like Incognito from Haas or Salvo from Hopsteiner, and then a new product from Yakima Chief Hops, which is Dynaboost. That's a flowable product to use in the whirlpool. Those, again, less green matter, which makes them cheaper to ship. You also, those hops, when you dry hop and when you add them late, they absorb a lot of like up to 15% maybe, and that might be 10 or it might be 20. I should have checked that number before we started. They absorb so much of the beer. Now, at a homebrew level, do you care that much about the loss? At a commercial level, you really care.
Yeah, obviously.
So that's the plus. Those products are developed for efficiency. They also can give you more intense flavor. So as a homebrewer, you think, do I care about the loss, but do I want the intense flavor? And that's what makes them somewhat attractive. Then you go to that next level, which are either terpenes, hop oils, where you are just extracting that small, basically odor compounds from the hop. So like YCH has a new product, which just came out, which is Hyper Boost for dry hopping. And then there's a company, Abstracts, and you really want to, if you're looking at their products, you want to look for Abstracts hops. And that they began life as a cannabis extraction company. So now they have basically 4 products that they're selling to the brewing market.
Yeah, Chris, I actually had Chris Graham on last episode, and he was talking about Abstracts, and he was actually pretty favorable towards it. He said they've had a good experience with it.
Really interesting. I mean,
hop oil, as I understand it, an extract. It's a hop oil extract, so you can add it right at finishing. You can add it to a finished beer to taste, right?
Right, and you could use it. So at a commercial brewer, which you could at a homebrew level too, you can adjust your beer when you go, it's done. I didn't get what I wanted. You can add it then, but it does need to be added to beer, but that their products include one or just Sky Farmer fruit flavors, and a lot of people are certainly thinking about hop drinks, everything related to hop drinks, I would say. But one extract is actually coming from hops. So it's that you're just taking the pellets, abstracting from hops themselves. Another is a reconstructed hop. You know what? Tom Nielsen, who spent 20 years at Sierra Nevada and just went to work at Abstracts, refers to as the forever hop. And that's they are analyzing that this is the impact you get from the hops, and we can find these other compounds and always put them together, and it'll be the same as whatever moment in time we capture.
Yeah, he was mentioning, I think Abstracts was using fruits and other fruit flavors and other flavors to sort of blend in and get the overall hop flavor they were looking for, even if it wasn't purely from hops.
Yeah, so it's so they're Centennial. They have a product Centennial, and that it has no Centennial hops in it.
Yeah.
So they're going to they're getting linalool for lavender. I don't know where they get their geraniol from, but it works much like Centennial, and so that's it. And then their fourth product is actually is from cannabis, but they are the terpenes.
Yeah.
So there's no THC in them. There's no CBD in it. And particularly, I've had several beers now with the name Pineapple Express, and that's using their Pineapple Express product. And it definitely will, if you're familiar with weed, it will bring back memories of that. So those are all things that can be added. Haas has a new line, euphonics, which are also taken from botanicals that you can add towards the end. So a lot of things either to replicate hop flavors or to augment hop flavors are there at the end. A tricky thing is these are, because they're extracts, the dosing level is incredibly high. So, for a home brewer, that gets a little bit tricky.
Yeah, I think he was mentioning he was using, tiny fractions of a small bottle for a keg.
You're using a dropper.
Or, actually, he said he used a toothpick with a single glass. You would literally use a toothpick to get the flavor you want.
I've got some Abstracts products and some products from CalSec in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Yeah.
And in both cases, like you can take, I did this recently at Lady Justice in Denver, and you can take a lowly a beer with not much hop in it, and you're talking a pint glass, and you stick the toothpick into the bottle that has the extract in it. You stick the toothpick in the beer, swirl it around a couple times, take it out, and you've got the full impact.
That's what he said. And that was with the Abstracts, which I guess is available at the homebrew level. I know they sell it at More Beer. Is the other one available in homebrew sizes or no?
Not that I know of.
Not that you know of. Okay.
I would be surprised if the Haas products, in which case you could take a look and see what Yakima Valley Hops, which is in Yakima, has, because they are, they sell the Haas products. That includes full range of hops, and particularly in other words, that smaller breweries are going to get their hops from there, and you might be able to get it. Homebrewers might be able to as well, or a group of homebrewers, or get a brewer near you to order them and buy them from them.
Okay, so we talked through the lupulin powders, the cryo hops kind of stuff, and then we talked a little bit about the hop oil extracts. Are there any other new products you wanted to talk about?
I think that hits the product size. Obviously, it's a tricky time in hops, which I think we might talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about the industry in a minute.
Yeah, but there's still new varieties coming out.
Well, that's actually next on the list is new hop varieties, and obviously we talked about quite a few last time. I think you'd come out of New Zealand last episode we did. But what are some of the new hop varieties coming out on the market soon that you find interesting and unique?
Which brewers might have, homebrewers and brewers certainly are familiar with, which is from the Hop Breeding Company. And that Hop Breeding Company, of course, they developed Citra Mosaic, which kind of started us down this path of fruitier. When Citra came out, pale ales were still the number one beer style in the U.S.
Mhm.
And that was 15 years ago. It came out 16 years ago. And then it's been all IPA since then, and they've been at the forefront of that. And so the HBC, as I said, Citra Mosaic, but also Equinaut and Thiols and Sabro. So they just named the first hop that they're commercializing, and that's in 4 years. So Thiols was the last. That was 4 years ago,
Okay.
and that was HBC 586, which a lot of brewers are familiar with. It's been in brands for a few years, where brewers were buying tens of thousands of pounds of it. But when a hop gets a name and it's on more farms, then brewers are going to be more confident to say, I can get this hop all the time.
Sure.
And it's called Crush.
Crush. Okay.
And it's got
So Crush is the old HBC 586, right?
Right. And we talked before several times about survivables. And it's really high in survivables. And it's got a lot of geranium. So you can see it just easily, it creates a lot of, it's almost a fruit cocktail sort of thing. So maybe not as intensely tropical. I mean, not that guava part that you get sometimes, but it's got a cross section. And in promoting the hop, and it's tricky. So HBC is a breeding company. It's a partnership between Haas and Yakima Chief Ranches, which itself is a partnership of 3 hop farms. They're all members of Yakima Chief Hops. So you'll see it marketed by Yakima Chief Hops and Haas right now. Those are the two that'll have it, although other Hollingberry will be selling it and things like that.
It's a proprietary hops then, right?
Right, but it is proprietary hop. But they, in promoting it, certainly the idea is when you rub this hop and smell, a lot of times when you rub a hop, you go, oh, that's kind of interesting. This has this character and this character. You put it in beer, it's different. Crush is a lot more in beer. What you smell before is what you get in beer, which makes it, that's kind of interesting. And it simplifies things for saying, how am I going to use this hop when it's new to me? So I would say that it's certainly a contender for Rookie of the Year in 2025.
Awesome. So Crush, we'll start looking for that. What other ones did you find new or interesting?
Well, I one that doesn't have a name yet, from Hopsteiner. In a way, this completes a trio of their hops developed through their genetics program, which they. So one of those was Helios, which isn't going to excite homebrewers because it's a high alpha hop, super efficient, meaning that it doesn't take as many inputs because it's resistant to disease. It yields a phenomenal amount of pounds per acre. We got to wait till it's a little bit more mature to say for sure, but we're probably talking about in excess of 3,500 pounds per acre. And not to pick on Citra, but I guess I am, just to give you a sense of balance. Citra is about 1,600 pounds per acre. So you're getting a lot more, and it's high alpha.
Right, so you can use it as a boil hop.
Yeah, so on a global, it's important to remember on a global basis, alpha is still super important. Snow from China might have almost no bitterness, but they need a lot of alpha hops to add that little bitterness for balancing that.
Right, and a lot of the high alpha hops are turned into extract anyways, right? So they can store them for long periods. Yeah, so they can store them for a long time.
Right, and again, you don't have the green matter; they're more efficient, so on. And just backing up, one other thing we could point out: a plus to using, even starting with cryo, is most not of you get rid of the green matter, and that green matter is important. Green matter has some important things in it. Probably has bound thiols, as a matter of fact. So going to all extract or even oils and say, well, I like these flavors, is green matter does add some
Value.
beer quality. You go, oh yeah, this has hops. So no, most vendors are not advocating going to all these. They're saying you still need to use some pellets. You still need some, actual hops in there. But that's the wrong way to. Beyond what you can extract from the lupulin, you need some of that as well. But the green matter is certainly a driver in hop creep.
Mm-hmm.
So hop creep's less of a problem when you use um, these other things. But back to this third hop. So Helios was one. Alora, which came out last year from Hopsteiner,
Mm-hmm.
is another. It's resistant to disease. It gets a lot of yield and it has a lot of interesting qualities. And it's also I'm trying to remember, and I think that Hopsteiner has it classified as a high thiol impact hop. It definitely has thiols in it. And then the new hop here will be HS 16660. So I just like saying 666. And that's going to be named by the time harvest is complete, probably, or certainly by the winter when people could start contracting for this hop.
Awesome.
And it's definitely a high impact hop. A couple of hops from New Zealand, and we might have talked about Peacherine before, but if we did, it was barely available, and now that's fully available from Freestyle, and that shouldn't be a surprise. That it gives you a lot of peach quality.
Peacherine, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a high oil hop, so it works really well in dry hopping or late or something like that. And then they have another hop, man, I'm trying to think, Manita.
I think I remember you talking about this last time.
Yeah. I don't think I talked about this.
No?
And it's brand new, and I don't and it's available only on a limited basis right now. And again, it's going to, but it does, it's hard if you think of the impact you get from Nelson Sauvin, Motueka, and Rawaka. That's a lot of interesting aromas, compounds there, odor compounds and aroma. So it fits into a spot with those. That's going to be a little bit harder to find. The West Coast Breeding Company, which is in Oregon, they released named a hop year before last, Mackenzie, which is a good blender. So it works really well with other hops. I would say, I'd put it in a category with Luminosa from Indie Hops, also in Oregon. But they've got another variety under development called 2B, and it will get a name. You'd have to be watching for that while. Right now, there are only between 10 and 20,000 pounds of these, so there's not much out there.
Yeah.
And I think you have to probably get them directly from them. And 2B is more of a high impact hop. It'll work well as a single hop, again, because it's got a broad. Again, we keep using the word fruity, but that's what people want is fruity. So that's another one, but that's a kind of a down the road hop. And then Siegel Ranch in the Yakima Valley, which is like the first place Cascade was grown on scale, to give you an idea. So they got a pretty good heritage. They've got 3 varieties that are small amounts, but a little bit is and most of it's sold direct. But Hollingberry hops, it certainly has anchovy. That's one of them, which has that unique name. And I don't know if we talked about anchovy before, but I don't think we did.
No.
So Fast Fashion, a brewery in Seattle, they were interested in this hop, and they asked John Siegel, will, we want this hop. And he's going, well, you got to, I need to plant X amount. And they're saying we'll sponsor, I think maybe it was an acre, and we'll buy everything from that acre. Um, and then they said, well, and if we do this, can we name the hop? And fast fashion, they would make these pizza beers.
Okay.
And I sure, and so he said, well, yeah, I guess you can. And they said, we want to call it a hop anchovy. To which John said, why don't you just call it? So can we say that on the air?
Oh.
But it does not smell like anchovies. And then another hop out of that is Zumo. And Zumo has this really distinct lime note when you rub it. It's a little harder to get it to transfer into beer. Although I had a Mexican lager from Other Half, and I actually had it in Philadelphia, but I think it was brewed in New York. And you're going, there's a lime note in this beer, and there's no lime. So it's made an interesting addition there. Russian River brewed an IPA-like beer, I think, that they called Zumo Wrestling. Again, it's sort of like a spice. You'd have to think what you're putting it together with, because that lime can get overwhelmed, but it makes a nice note. And then the hop that I think could tantalize people, and we have to see, because last year there were literally only a few plants, enough that I'm not sure there were 100 pounds of hops. But a lot of brewers, it's called Tangier, and it has a real orange note, noticeably so. So just to give you an idea that this year, farmers in the Northwest will harvest about 44,000 acres of hops. There are, I believe, 10 acres of anchovy, 10 acres of Zumo, and John Siegel put in 25 acres of Tangier. But Tangier they're all babies, and their yield will be very low the
first year.
So
Yeah,
there's not much Tangier out there. Russian River has a pretty good size contract, and I know Odell here in Colorado, I think, is tasting a decent amount. I talked to other smaller breweries and go, yeah, well, I've been promised like 1 or 2 11-pound boxes. So there isn't going to be much out there. You might be looking for beers that are made with it, get an idea what you think of them. And I think more of the hop will be available next year.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned it's been about 15 years since the IPA revolution started, and it also takes about 15 years to bring a hop to market. But I was kind of interested. You said there were quite a few changes going on in the hop market at the World Brewing Conference, and I assume probably related to some of the changes going on in craft beer as well.
Exactly. So craft beer it's certainly. So if we go back, and this is a lot of people weren't involved with brewing, although crazily enough in 2007, 2008, all of a sudden it was really hard to get Cascade hops even. The large breweries around the world had not contracted.
I remember there was actually a huge shortage. They talked about the great hop shortage at that time.
And it was an alpha shortage. And because there was this alpha shortage, everything was bought up. Cascade was bought at like $30 a pound. This is Cascade, otherwise, which before you could have bought it like $2 a pound.
Right.
And we got to take inflation into account and things like that. Cascade went for $30 a pound. It was turned into CO2 extract, and it was used in a boil by large breweries where you didn't taste any of the flavor. They just wanted the alpha.
Yeah.
That was it. That shortage did not last very long. Those large breweries came in and they contracted to make sure there would be enough acres of those alpha hops. And of course, farmers in the Northwest obliged. They expanded their operations. So they could plant more hops, they could process more hops. And 2 years later, there were too many hops around the world, and this infrastructure was in place. At that time, craft brewers were starting to buy more hops. Infrastructure was there. It was easy. It was not easy to start planting a lot more Citra, particularly Mosaic doesn't come out till 2012, because propagating them
Takes time.
it was not. There's more propagating facilities around. So the simplest thing is you could take a rhizome, split it many times, and expand a field that way. So what expanded a lot, varieties that are already a decent amount in the ground, like Cascade and Centennial, particularly. And you had this beginning of expansion that craft beer was driving. So in 2012, still half the hops harvested in the Northwest were valued for their aroma, and half were valued just as alpha hops.
Right.
It's tricky, Homer. You see this definition of dual purpose hops. The idea of a dual purpose hops is you could use it in the boil. At that level, say Simcoe, which was, you go, well, that has enough alpha, but you were paying a price. You were obviously paying for the odor compound, so you'd have to think about using it at a 60-minute point. But what spread is we reached the point in the late teens where 80% of hops in the U.S. were aroma and only 20% were alpha.
Wow.
So and craft was driving this demand, and part of it was the craft brewers thought they were going to continue to grow, and they contracted because obviously merchants were happy to have them contract 3, 4, 5 years out.
Sure.
It's really useful because now a farmer can say, I can afford to put in this infrastructure, and you got to realize that we're talking about picking facilities which are large. First, you need a gigantic room where you're doing the picking, and then you've got all these kilns, and you use them about 5 weeks out of the year.
Right, exactly. And same thing with the picking machines, which are quite expensive and complicated.
Right. Many of them are actually built on the farm, and over the years that they've made changes and things. But so you had this massive expansion, and obviously, in retrospect, brewers' eyes were bigger than drinkers' stomachs.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I think somebody mentioned the other day that I think the goal was like 20% of the beer market or something like that. I don't think it's ever, I don't think craft beer's ever broken above 12 is what I recall. In terms of volume anyways.
Right. Yeah. It's hard to measure because a lot of, you would have to add back in. Of course, some of that's coming back. We won't talk about that, but Tilray has bought a lot back from Miller Coors and AB, so now they're reclassified as craft. But if you think about, if you added Goose Island back in there and Elysia and things like that, the share might be 14%. That's the people making IPAs.
It's still a relatively small percentage compared to the classic American lager,
Right. So, what's happened is that a couple 3 years ago, that it became obvious that there's way too much surplus out there. The estimate is 35 to 40 million pounds, and you just I don't think that the listeners care too much about the hop business this way, but real quickly, a farmer is going to borrow a certain amount of money from the bank at the beginning of the year to say, I'm going to sell this crop at the end of the year. And then you begin paying interest. They're also paying interest on all that infrastructure. Merchants are paying interest on what is stored because they bought that from farmers. So the cost and interest has just been going up and up and up. So at the beginning of 2023, it was suggested that it was necessary to cut aroma It might have said 10% at the time. The key thing is hop acreage has gone from above 60,000 acres in 2022 to less than 44,000 acres today, which puts it at about the same level as 2015. Will that put it in balance? It's going to take a couple more years. A plus to small brewers who don't have contracts is you can get hops a lot cheaper now, maybe 20 to 30% cheaper, if you don't want to go make selection, for instance, which a brewery at a certain size, say above 8 to 10,000 barrels, might be doing that, and depending upon where IPA is in their portfolio. But on the spot market, you can get hops at a lot less expensive price. It doesn't change as much at the homebrew level.
Right, but it does. It does help in terms of availability, because I know
availability.
You probably know this, but homebrewers are at the very tail end of this whole supply chain, so we kind of get what's left over, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not. Yeah. There's a paranoia among us homebrewers that we're never going to get the good hops, and you're always going to get what's left over. But quality-wise, you can still get good hops.
The hop quality overall has just increased dramatically in the last 20 years.
Because all of these things were done to get better aroma.
Yeah.
So you may not get the hops that other half is going to pick, but that doesn't mean that that's what other half wants. You might prefer something else. So there's a lot of quality out there, and there's a lot more of it. I think back to, again, this is like 2012. And when somebody would have Rawaka, when you could get like 4 ounces of Rawaka, and you just had to jump right on it because it was going to be gone.
Yeah.
And now Rawaka is expensive, but it's easy to get. And so it does make things easier to get. And if you're willing to buy in a larger amount, and maybe you can do that with the club, then you can get, there are times there'll be
well, as you mentioned, though, Stan, I mean, hops are plentiful now, right? There's not a real shortage now. If there was a shortage, we'd certainly see more effect in the homebrew market.
Right, and you can go together and get a good price.
Yeah. So interesting. So I guess the decline, we're at the beginning of a decline in the craft beer market. I think most people would agree with that. It certainly have a big impact on the hop market.
When it gets back, and part of the concern is like Citra acreage is down like 30. Chinook acreage, Citra acreage is down 30% plus, but so is Chinook acreage. Now we understand there's too much Citra out there, and that will get back in balance quickly because it's monitored. Will it mean it's really hard to get Chinook? I don't know. So that is a concern. There may be shortages and other things, and smaller breweries that don't have contracts are probably going to look a couple of years down the road and all of a sudden see that they're going to have to pay higher prices. Mm-hmm. Because there are a lot of, you see hop prices coming down at a time. There's a reason beer prices aren't coming down because of inflation. Yeah. And the hop growers have those same inflationary pressures.
Diesel,
the cost
everything.
Of labor is going up.
Fertilizers like what, doubled or tripled in many cases?
Fertilizer fertilizer in 2024 was not bad.
Oh, okay.
It was horrible in 2023.
I remember it was, well, they lost natural gas in Europe was a big problem, and
right.
That's what you use to make fertilizer. So,
right.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, Stan, appreciate your insights. I wanted to get your closing thoughts on some of the things you learned at the World Beer Conference and where the hop market's going in general.
Well, right now, I think that it's not at all clear where the hop market is going to be in 2025. But what you're seeing is a lot more research, and until interest in IPAs diminishes, you're you're going to see these efforts to make it more efficient, to have even more what a hop breeder, Peter Darby in England, refers to as high impact hops, and so the ability to have more intense flavors, and it's going to. And this was not discussed, which shows you just how prominent IPA is. We didn't really get into discussions what's going to happen with the landrace hops, the stuff we like in lagers, which are being impacted by climate change. And will the Germans and the Czechs still be able to literally afford, I guess that would be the right word, to grow that, to stay in the hop growing business?
Interesting. Well, Stan, I appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing us all the great hop news. It's great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you.
My guest today was Stan Hieronymus, author of For the Love of Hops, as well as Brewing Local, Brew Like a Monk, and Brewing with Wheat. Thank you again, Stan. Well, a big thank you to Stan Hieronymus for joining me this week. Thanks also to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They've recently launched an all-new experience called Craft Spirits and Distilling. If you make or love spirits, check out spiritsanddistilling.com for recipes, how-to videos, their Spirits and Distilling podcast, and much more. Again, that new site is spiritsanddistilling.com. And also BeerSmith Web, the online version of BeerSmith brewing software. BeerSmith for the web lets you design great beer recipes from any browser, including your tablet or phone. Edit recipes on the go with access to the same full suite of recipe building tools as our desktop version. Try BeerSmith Web today by creating a free account at beersmithrecipes.com. And finally, a reminder to click those like and subscribe buttons on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or whatever platform you're on. Clicking those buttons is a great way to support the show. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great brewing week.